Good morning and welcome to another edition of Facebook Live from our offices here of the Inter-American Development Bank. Today we're privileged to have my dear friend John Todd, the president of the International, the FIA, the International Automobile Association. And he's equally the special envoy of the UN Secretary General on road safety. Now, why is road safety important? Well, few people know, for instance, that just in Latin America, over 120,000 people die every year, not to mention close to 5 million accidents, 5 million injuries rather, that happen as a result of all of these road safety issues that we have. More people today die on roads than, say, the combination of HIV/AIDS, lung cancer, malaria, or tuberculosis combined. Just think about the proportions of what this means. And besides the enormous human cost and the tragedy to so many families, it represents anywhere from 2 to 4% of GDP in terms of losses to Latin American economies. So what we're doing today with FIA is to launch an initiative with the insurance industry that will help bring governments and civil society together to be able to deal better with this issue. So let me begin with you, John, and begin by talking a little bit about how you see this initiative, why you think it's so important to engage, as we are today, the insurance industry.
Let me say first that in low and middle income countries, the fact that the number of cars increases is good. But this means that mobility is increasing and that the economy is growing, and that is good. But we need to avoid that this increase results in more crashes and more road fatalities. How? From experience in developed countries, we know that we need safer cars. Today, same brand, same models has different safety features. So if you buy one car here, for example, in Washington, and if you buy the same car in Bolivia, it looks the same, but the safety features are different, and it has to stop. That's why.
And explain a little bit why that happens, John. Is this because of a cost factor? Does that same car that you see here in Bolivia, as you point out, does it have a price differential?
I mean, of course. I mean, there are some economic factors, and I mean, same. I mean, in certain developed countries, the car is limited in terms of age. After 10 years, you cannot use the car. So what happens? I mean, those cars move to developing country where they are used, and they are not safe.
Right.
So it's something we need to address and we need to change. And I mean, we are working also with manufacturers and together with the UNEC, the UN Transport Agency, to define some voluntary minimum safety standard which should be applied by all the manufacturers.
So imagine that person in Bolivia who today is buying a car and is listening to you as we speak. That person, how does he or she know what things to ask of that car such that it be more safe in the Bolivian roads?
She must get informed.
Okay.
And I mean, we have some safety standards which are checked, like for example through NCAP, and NCAP is able to tell precisely what are the strengths and weakness of a car. So clearly, before you buy a car, you must make sure that your car is safe. And I will give you another crucial example: ESC, electronic stability control. I mean, the car you buy here, each car has a ESC, and I mean it's a vital improvement on safety in the car. And unfortunately, it is not compulsory in a lot of developing countries, and you don't have that.
This feature, and by the way, as many of you know, not only is John very successful in his own right in FIA, but for all the car enthusiasts, he was the president of Ferrari. He was a big race car driver himself, but he has devoted his life to this issue, to the issue of road safety. Explain to us what is all these complex electronics. Does that mean that inside the car you have all the switches that you can determine where the problems are, as opposed to having, say, mechanically?
I mean, through electronic, you are really able to improve safety, and it's cheap, it's easy, and it is available. I mean, we know very well. Look, I mean, how we are able to address to people. It's something which was not achievable a few years ago, and now we can. So you have the same safety device on modern cars, and it's something which is going to increase. But again, you know, most of the crashes are happening in developing countries, so it has not yet arrived. So, and we know we are talking about connected car, about autonomous car. It could happen in developed countries, but unfortunately, it will not happen before many decades in developing countries. That's why we must make sure that road users, car drivers, motorbike drivers, public transportation are driving safe vehicles.
We have a lot of questions coming in, and I invite you to send more questions. We have a question from Natalia in Brazil, talking about this very issue. She says that safety standards in cars in Latin America, as you were correctly saying, are lower than those in Europe, or for that matter, the United States. What can be done to ensure that those safer cars arrive in our region? What needs to happen?
I mean, work with governments.
Raise the standard.
Have a very innovative IDB pushing on that, lobbying the government. And I mean, you are doing one amazing work to try to improve roads, to make roads safer for any users in the Latin American countries. So we need to have the government to engage. And I mean, why in certain countries it has improved? Because it has been a decision taken by the government to say, we want to see those crashes to stop. And it has worked. You take an example like France. In France, 45 years ago, you had 18,000 people who were dying on the roads. 18,000. 45 years later, 3 times more vehicles, 5 times less crashes and victims on the road, because it has been addressed. And we have the prescription. It's around education, law enforcement, vehicles, road infrastructures, post-crash care. And you know, in developing countries, simple moves like buckling your safety belt, putting your helmet, speeding, drink driving, text driving will halve those number of victims from 1 year to another. And we need to act.
We're here with Jan Todd, who is the president of the International Automobile Federation, and we're talking about road safety. And I want to invite everybody who's watching to send their questions. We have a number of them coming in, but I wanted to, beyond that, Jan, you explain a little bit the following. Not only are you running FIA, but you're equally the UN Special Envoy for Road Safety. Talk to us the linkage that exists between road safety and the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals.
I mean, Sustainable Development Goals, and you see, I'm proud to have this symbol here. I mean, road safety has been included, which is something new. It had been included last year. And it's at target 3.6. So target 3.6 is to halve the number of victims by 2020. So we urge each single government around the world to address road safety. As you mentioned earlier, it has to be addressed as a pandemic like HIV/AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis. And the big difference, on those pandemics, you don't know yet what to do. You have improved the vaccine, but you don't have the final solution. On the road, you have the solutions. So that's the 3.6. And the 11.2 is to make access to public transportation to any road users around the world by 2030.
I have a question here from Joan, which is asking, what is the IDB doing to improve safety, road safety in Latin America and the Caribbean? Let me answer here real quick that what we're doing is we finance close to $1.5 billion a year on roads alone. And today, thanks to our cooperation with FIA and Jan's team, in every road program, not only we do demand that there are maintenance issues that are in place, but equally some of the road safety issues that are essential. Perhaps, Jan, you can talk a little bit about how you see the advancements that can be done in Latin American countries vis-a-vis Europe in terms of roads themselves, the kinds of signals, the kinds of ways to reach out to a first responders, some of the things that you've been working on as well.
That's a very good point. And in fact, it's something also which needs to be engaged and improved by governments. We have what we call the road safety conventions. And the road safety convention is under the leadership of UNEC, the UN Economic for Europe, and that is applying to the global world. And that's minimum convention standards, about signals, about the level of the cars, about good transportations. So each government should apply. And unfortunately, 1 billion of people do not enjoy those road regulations. So it's something in my capacity of special envoy for road safety that I lobby governments around the world to make sure that they will apply to those standards.
So that goes very well to this question that we get from Alan from Trinidad and Tobago that basically says, today we have budgets that are tight. How can countries scale up policing to enforce the necessary traffic laws?
So it's another interesting point because in April 16 in New York at the UN General Assembly, it was decided to work on a UN road safety fund, which is something completely new. And I mean, it has happened in other pandemics again. And unfortunately, not enough money is dedicated to road safety by the member states and by the public sector. So there is a responsibility, and we are really, and we know that by engaging $700 million every year, we will be able to save 65,000 lives and 2.5 million injured people. So, I mean, for a limited cost, if everybody will, member states, public sector, car manufacturers, tire manufacturers, any petrol suppliers, we could really address something and have big hopes that with the support of the member states, we will be able to achieve this UN Road Safety Fund.
One of the initiatives that we have are launching today about uses of insurance. It's surprising to see that in many countries in Latin America, you have a low component of people who insure their automobiles, but more importantly, they insure for theft and they insure for loss of property, but not for the other areas which are so critical. Tell us a little bit about that. Caminemos Seguros, which is this.
No, I mean, we thanks to you, we just launched this program, and for me it is essential. We need to activate insurance company. I mean, insurance company, and for me it is absolutely unacceptable that some cars drivers, some motorbike drivers, they are not insured. So they need to be insured, and then they will get some advantage, and everybody will get advantage. And I mean, those who may be victims will get an advantage as well. Don't forget that in this part of the world, more than 1/3 of the victims are pedestrian. And globally, between pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists, that means 70% of the victims. And most of them don't have a proper insurance. So again, it is time to have that changing.
Here, that's a very interesting point that you make, but let me turn to something else. Arantxa, who's sending us a question from Spain. By the way, I invite, we have a lot of questions, but we want to try to get as many questions to Jan. The goal for 2020 on road safety is very ambitious, as we know. But do you think it's feasible, and what kind of behavioral change and actions can be implemented to prevent injuries and to save lives?
Yes, it is possible. And as we said earlier, it has been demonstrated in developed countries. I was mentioning earlier, in 45 years, those figures have been divided by 5 in developed countries. And unfortunately, in developing countries, the trend is going in the bad direction. So, simple thing, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to repeat that. Buckle the safety belt. Put one homologated helmet. Speeding, drink driving, and text driving will immediately divide minimum by 2 the number of victims. And I think it would be unfair to say it's only the responsibility of the government. But road safety is a responsibility of each single citizen. And sometimes, I get interviewed by journalists who ask me some question, but I say that's also your responsibility. Because when you advert, when you write, when you speak, when you make a TV program, you must put road safety amongst your priority. It's a lot on education as well. And I mean, you go to school, you learn Spanish, English, French. You don't learn road safety. So you should also learn how to behave on the road, which is essential.
So, Jan, you were saying earlier, as a UN Special Envoy, you go and lobby governments. You work, of course, as the main regulating authority on the automobile sector around the world. But you also do a lot of what's called public diplomacy, which is ways to engage through the uses of public media and advertising. Tell us a little bit of the things that you have been doing in this space.
I will say the last global campaign, which is indeed the biggest ever campaign made on road safety at a global level, was with JCDecaux, with the #1 billboard company around the world. And we have taken what we call the golden rules. And for example, we have Marc Marquez, MotoGP world champion, with encouraging put your helmet. I will never drive my motorbike without helmet. We have Fernando Alonso, Formula 1 world champion, buckle your safety belt. You have Pharrell Williams, who is claiming don't text and drive. You have Miguel Nadal saying make sure you have the proper tire pressure. So we have 11 stars. The last one is vision. And I mean we underestimate that 1 billion of people don't have a good vision, and they are road users. So that we are campaigning on that now, and it's Michael Fassbender who is claiming to check your vision. And unfortunately, not everybody can afford to have glasses. So we are working to make glasses more affordable, because with $3, $4, $5, we should be able to supply glasses to those who don't see enough.
That's a great initiative. Here I have a question from Armando in Colombia, who asks, how will green driving help increase road safety, both in Latin America and beyond?
I mean, it's an interesting question. Clearly, green driving, or more healthy cars. I mean, it goes through hybrid, which do happen now. It goes through electric cars, and clearly we are developing the use of electric car in cities. That's why FIA implemented a new single-seater championship, which is Formula E, which is happening in 12 of the biggest countries in the world, like Paris, Berlin, Hong Kong, New York, Montreal, Rome. And we want to demonstrate that electric car in cities is the best way of moving, the safest and most healthy way. And it's starting, it's changing, but it will take time.
Here we have another question, and thank you for that, Jan, from Michelle in Guyana. She asks, shared mobility is on the rise in many countries, the whole sharing economy as it's commonly known. Are ride-sharing services either increasing the chances of road accidents, or would people be just as likely to have an accident if, say, for instance, they took a public bus? Good question.
I mean, I do, we must not forget that unfortunately a lot of countries don't have access to public transportation. So we must encourage, and sharing vehicles is probably a good way. So I mean, it must be certain rules because certain principles. You know, I mean, very often, unfortunately, in developing countries, I mean, people, I mean, sometimes the drivers put the safety belt, but the passengers do not put the safety belt. So we must make sure that those who are driving the shared cars are serious people, you know, and it's also the work of the people who are in the car to encourage the driver to be safe. But clearly, it will help on congestions. It will help of the increase on traffic. I mean, now very often in cities or even for, I mean, for traveling over the countries. I mean, you have the driver in the car and nobody else. So if you can share the car, it will make things better.
Jan, you spend a lot of time looking at new technology. Certainly you see it in the industry that you're in the races that you regulate. And you were very instrumental in moving, for instance, the car racing into electric cars. Mm-hmm. Do you see the day that driverless cars are going to be all over our streets? Do you see that fundamental change? Where you see the future, and how does that future change for the better on road safety?
So I mean, a connected car, autonomous car, yes, it's coming. It's coming, but developed countries will have the advantage on that. But still, I mean, a lot of issues, you know, we are talking about insurance, responsibility, so a lot of things need to be addressed by government, by the manufacturers, by people who are making the laws. But as I said earlier, unfortunately, 90% of the road crashes victims are happening in developing countries. And in developing countries, we will not see that before decades, you know? Because, I mean, we were mentioning earlier as well, I mean, after 10 years in US, you have to sell your car. Or you have to get rid of your car. You cannot use it. So what you do, I mean, those cars are sold to developing countries, you know? And it makes unsafe vehicles because they get too old. So before those developing countries will have access to connected and autonomous car, it will take time. And we have one problem which is urgent, which needs to be addressed now, which is to reduce the number of victims of the roads.
I know we have so many questions here, and unfortunately we have time for just one last question, and I'm sorry for all those who have been sending their questions, but one last question from Wesley. He says, how do we make sure funds that are earmarked for road safety are in essence used to implement road safety action plans? How does one make sure that if a government has said, okay, I'm going to invest X amount in road safety programs, how do you make sure that those investments are actually done in road safety and not in water and sanitation, as an example?
I mean, of course, it's a responsibility of the government and of the banks who are responsible. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you know, I mean, how careful you are when you dedicate some funding on the road. So that is absolutely essential. But maybe give me to another point, which for me is crucial, is law enforcement. Mm-hmm. You know. And without law enforcement, you will not be able to have the result you want. And unfortunately, I mean, corruption is very difficult to properly enforce the laws. So corruption is something which needs to be addressed as a priority, and it's a bit linked to this question, which needs to be addressed as a priority by developing countries. Otherwise, we will not be able to halve the number of victims by 2020.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Jan. Thanks very much. And, you know, this is an issue that should concern all of us. And I think you've given us a very clear scenario that, on the one hand, the solution and the ways to get to the solution are there, are around the quality of cars that we are in. It has to do around the quality of roads that we drive on. It has to be about the discipline that people have, not only in the way they drive, the fact that they drive safely, that they wear their seatbelt, that they don't drink or wear their helmet. But more importantly, it is about society demanding that this problem end. And we see, as you have correctly pointed to us, that other countries have been able to bring this down to at least half of the accidents, like many countries in Europe, as an example. So I just, for all of you who have followed us, thank you very much. I will invite you to follow our blog on transport and mobility. It's called Mobile Blog. Please follow us in this blog. We constantly have a conversation around this. And again, thank you very much, John, for coming and visiting with us.
Thank you. And if I may, all those who have been with us this morning or this afternoon, depending where it is, please be our road safety ambassadors, and we will be very proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.